One night, Arthur found himself writing about a door. It stood in a house much like his own, in a room that didn't exist until now. As the words filled the page, he felt compelled to explore his own home. His footsteps echoed through the empty halls until he reached the far end of the second floor where an old storage room stood. The door was different now. It was the same door from his story. Ancient wood, marked with strange symbols, and a tarnished brass handle. Arthur's hand trembled as he reached for the handle. The air around him grew colder, and the sound of the rain outside faded, replaced by an eerie silence. He turned the knob, and the door creaked open. Beyond it was not the storage room he had known, but a narrow corridor stretching into darkness. The walls pulsed faintly, as though alive, and the air carried the stench of decay. "Tell us more," the familiar whisper echoed from the depths. Arthur stepped inside, his heart hammering. The corridor seemed endless, lined with countless doors, each one different from the next. Some were grand and ornate, others simple and worn. From behind them came muffled sounds, sobs, laughter, screams. He tried the first door. Locked. The second too. The third creaked open, revealing a room filled with mirrors. In each reflection, Arthur saw himself at different stages of life, young and hopeful, old and frail, and everything in between. But in the center mirror, his reflection stared back with a sinister grin, its eyes dark voids. "Finish the story," the reflection said, its voice overlapping with the whispers. Arthur slammed the door shut and backed away. He turned, intending to flee, but the corridor had changed. The entrance was gone, replaced by more doors. Back in the waking world, Arthur's body sat rigid at his desk, his hand moving on its own, writing furiously. The figures had returned, their pale forms circling him like vultures. "You're almost there," one of them hissed. "The final story will set us free." Arthur's mind screamed in protest, but his body betrayed him. He could feel the words pouring from his pen, his own thoughts a distant echo. The story unfolded in the corridor beyond the strange door, each passage he wrote manifesting before him in real time. He opened another door, revealing a vast, empty plain under a blood-red sky. Another door led to a cavern of endless whispers, where shadows moved without form. Finally, he came to the last door, a massive obsidian slab etched with glowing runes. As Arthur wrote its description, the door began to hum, vibrating with a deep, resonant energy. "You must open it," the whispers urged. "The final truth lies beyond." With a trembling hand, Arthur pushed the obsidian door open. Beyond it was a void, a swirling maelstrom of darkness and light. At its center stood a figure, cloaked in shadows, its form constantly shifting. The entity spoke without words, its voice a presence in Arthur's mind. "You have done well, storyteller. But every tale has a price." Arthur felt his strength leaving him, his very essence drawn into the void. His vision blurred, and his mind teetered on the edge of oblivion. Yet, even as his body withered, his pen continued to move, finishing the final sentence of the story. The entity extended a hand, and Arthur's notebook lifted into the air, its pages flipping wildly. The figures around him bowed low, their forms dissolving into mist, absorbed into the entity's shadow. "Your stories will live on, but you will remain." Arthur's body slumped over the desk, lifeless. But in the corridor beyond the strange door, his soul awakened, now bound to the endless hall of stories. He became the guardian, the keeper of tales, ensuring that the doors would always remain open for those who dared to enter. In the town of Blackburn Hollow, the old Victorian house stood silent for years. No one dared approach it, for they knew the stories, whispers of a cursed writer whose tales could trap the unwary. But on stormy November nights, when the rain fell hardest, some claimed to see a light in the upstairs window and hear the faint scratch of a pen against paper. And those brave, or foolish, enough to knock on the door might just find it open, inviting them to step inside and tell their own story. A story for a rainy November night. Arthur's existence within the corridor was unlike anything he could have imagined. Time, as he had known it, no longer held meaning. Days, years, centuries, these concepts dissolved into the endless now of the corridor. His physical body, the one slumped over the desk in Blackburn Hollow, had been left behind. What remained was his essence, tethered to this labyrinth of doors and stories. Each door represented a tale, some familiar, others alien beyond comprehension. They whispered constantly, begging to be told. Arthur was not alone. The figures who had haunted him in the waking world, the pale, hollow-eyed watchers, now shared his domain. But here they were different. They moved silently, their forms shifting and blurring at the edges, like static on an old television screen. They no longer spoke aloud, but communicated through the whispers of the corridor, their collective voice a constant hum in Arthur's mind. "You are one of us now," they whispered. "You write, and we will watch. The stories must never end." Arthur tried to resist at first. He wandered the corridor, searching for a way out, but it was a labyrinth without end. The further he walked, the more doors appeared, each one unique, each one demanding his attention. Eventually, exhaustion claimed him, and he found himself drawn back to the central chamber, the place where the obsidian door had stood. Here, a simple desk waited, much like the one in his old home. Upon it rested a fresh notebook and a single pen. Arthur sat down, and the watchers gathered around him. "Right?" they whispered. "It is your purpose now." As the pen touched the paper, Arthur felt the familiar pull. The stories flowed from him effortlessly, each one more vivid and horrifying than the last. He wrote of cursed villages, monstrous beings, and desperate souls making terrible bargains. But these were not mere fictions. As he wrote, the doors in the corridor began to open, one by one, revealing the worlds he had created. Through one door, a dense forest shrouded in eternal night stretched endlessly. The trees whispered secrets in a forgotten tongue, and creatures with too many eyes skittered in the shadows. Through another, a desolate battlefield stretched under a sky split by constant lightning. The ground was littered with bones, and spectral warriors fought an eternal war, their cries echoing through the void. Arthur realized with growing dread that each story he wrote became a reality, a fragment of existence trapped behind its own door. And the watchers fed on these stories, growing stronger with each new tale. The rain hammered against the roof like skeletal fingers drumming on a coffin lid. The kind of November rain that seemed to seep into your bones, leaving a chill that even the fiercest fire couldn't chase away. In the small town of Blackburn Hollow, the power lines swayed dangerously, and dim streetlights flickered like dying stars. No one lingered outside in this weather, except for Arthur Maynard. Arthur was a writer, a recluse by choice, and a man with a penchant for the eerie. He lived alone in a creaking Victorian house perched on a hill at the edge of town. Tonight, his usual routine of solitary writing was interrupted by an odd discovery. It began earlier that evening when he retrieved his mail. Among the usual stack of bills and advertisements was a weathered envelope with no return address. The paper felt strange under his fingertips, cold and brittle, as if it had been sitting somewhere forgotten for decades. His name was scrawled on the front in uneven, almost frantic handwriting. Curiosity trumped caution, and he carefully pried open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age, bearing only a few lines of text. "Tell them a story." One day, or what passed for a day in the corridor, Arthur discovered a door unlike any other. It was simple, unmarked, and it pulsed faintly with a warmth that reminded him of home. When he approached, the whispers grew agitated. "Do not open it," they warned. "It is not for you." But Arthur's curiosity, the very trait that had damned him, drove him forward. He grasped the handle and turned it. Beyond the door was a small room bathed in soft, golden light. In the center stood a figure, a woman with kind eyes and an air of quiet authority. She was neither a watcher nor a creation of his stories. "Arthur," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "you have suffered much, but your fate is not sealed." He stared at her, words failing him. "There is a way to escape this place," she continued, "but it comes at a price." Arthur's heart stirred with hope and fear. "What must I do?" "You must write one final story," she said. "A story of your own making, free of their influence. It must be perfect, for it will serve as your key. But if you fail, you will remain here forever, and they will consume you." Arthur returned to the central chamber, the watchers seething around him. They knew what he intended, and their whispers grew frantic. "You cannot defy us," they hissed. "You belong to the corridor." But Arthur ignored them. He picked up the pen and began to write. This time, the words did not flow easily. Every sentence was a struggle, every line a battle against the weight of the Watcher's presence. He wrote of a man who had lost everything but found the strength to fight back. A man who faced his fears and reclaimed his soul. The story was raw, filled with pain and hope, and it came from a place deep within him, a place the Watchers could not touch. As he wrote the final sentence, the corridor trembled. The Watchers screamed, their forms unraveling into streams of shadow. The unmarked door reappeared, its light shining brighter than ever. Arthur stood, his hands shaking. He approached the door, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he smiled. "You cannot leave," the Watchers cried. "The stories will die without you." Arthur placed his hand on the door. "Let them die," he said. He stepped through the door and into the golden light. The corridor dissolved behind him, the whispers fading into silence. Arthur awoke in his old study, the rain still pattering against the windows. The notebook lay open before him, filled with the story he had just written. But the pages were different, no longer tainted by the Watcher's influence. The curse was broken. From that night on, Arthur continued to write, but not out of fear or obligation. His stories were his own, and though they were still dark and chilling, they carried a spark of something new, hope. And every November, as the rain fell and the wind howled, Arthur would tell his tales, not for the Watchers, but for those who needed to remember that even in the darkest of nights, there is always a way out. Arthur's return to the world felt both like a rebirth and a haunting echo of his time in the corridor. At first, he was uncertain if he had truly escaped or if this was another illusion crafted by the Watchers. But as days turned into weeks, reality reasserted itself. The old Victorian house stood just as he had left it, yet it seemed less imposing now. The air was lighter, the shadows no longer stretched with malicious intent. Arthur resumed his life, but he was not the same man who had once retreated from the world. The corridor had changed him, and with its influence came a newfound purpose. He began to write again, this time with deliberate intent. His stories still carried the dark, macabre themes he had always been drawn to, but now they served as parables, tales of endurance, redemption, and the human capacity to overcome even the most harrowing of trials. Arthur's works quickly garnered attention. His stories were published in literary magazines, and soon he was approached by publishers eager to compile his tales into anthologies. The first collection, The Library of Lost Tales, became a phenomenon. Readers were drawn to the haunting beauty of his prose, the way his words danced between terror and solace. But there was something more to Arthur's stories, an unspoken truth that resonated deeply with those who read them. People began to claim that his tales spoke directly to their fears and regrets, offering them clarity and closure. Among his most devoted readers were those who felt lost, widows mourning their spouses, soldiers haunted by war, and dreamers crushed by the weight of reality. They wrote to Arthur, sharing their own stories and seeking solace in his words. Arthur read every letter, responding to many with personal notes. His replies carried the same quiet wisdom as his stories, offering comfort without pretense. For the first time, Arthur felt truly connected to the world beyond his own walls. One rainy November night, as Arthur sat by the fire with a fresh notebook, there was a knock at the door. His heart skipped, the memory of the Watchers flashing briefly in his mind. But when he opened the door, he found a young woman standing on the porch, drenched but smiling nervously. "Mr. Maynard?" she asked, clutching a dog-eared copy of the Library of Lost Tales. Arthur nodded, inviting her in. "Over tea," She explained that his stories had saved her life. She had been on the brink of despair, weighed down by the loss of her brother, but one of Arthur's tales had given her the strength to keep going. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, tears in her eyes. "Your words brought me back from the edge." Arthur was humbled. It was not the first time he had heard such a story, but each one felt profound. He realized that his writing had become a lifeline for many, a beacon of light in the darkness. After that night, more visitors came, always on rainy evenings. They brought their stories, their pain, and their gratitude. Arthur welcomed them all, listening as much as he shared. His home became a sanctuary, a place where people could find solace in the power of storytelling. One evening, Arthur discovered something peculiar. In the study where he wrote, a new door had appeared. Not one of the cursed doors from the corridor, but a simple, unassuming wooden door. At first, he hesitated to open it, fearing it might be a trick. But when he finally turned the handle, he found a small, cozy room filled with books. Each book bore the name of someone who had written to him or visited his home. Arthur realized this was no ordinary library. Each time he opened a book, it contained the story of the person whose name it bore, their fears, their hopes, their struggles. These were not just his stories, but the collective voices of those he had touched. From then on, Arthur made it his mission to help others fill their books. He encouraged his visitors to write their own tales, to confront their fears and find strength in their narratives. Years passed, and Arthur's reputation grew. He became more than just an author. He was a storyteller of the people, a guardian of their collective hopes and fears. His home, now known as the House of Rain, became a pilgrimage site for those seeking solace through storytelling. Arthur's work expanded beyond books. He began hosting workshops, teaching others the art of crafting stories that could heal and empower. His philosophy was simple. Every person has a story worth telling, and every story has the power to change a life. Even as he aged, Arthur never stopped writing. On the last rainy night of his life, he sat by the fire, his pen moving steadily across the page. When dawn broke, he was found peacefully slumped in his chair, a contented smile on his face. In his hand was his final story, a tale of a man who overcame the darkness and helped others find their light. It ended with a simple line: "The rain will fall, but the stories will always remain." Arthur Maynard's legacy endured long after his passing. The House of Rain became a literary foundation dedicated to preserving his work and supporting aspiring storytellers. His books continued to inspire generations, their timeless themes resonating with readers around the world. But on rainy November nights, those who visited the old Victorian house often spoke of a peculiar phenomenon. They claimed to hear the faint scratch of a pen against paper and feel the warmth of a fire that no one had lit. And if they listened closely, they might hear a voice, soft and steady, whispering, "Tell me your story." After Arthur Maynard's passing, the House of Rain evolved into a unique sanctuary dedicated to the art of storytelling. Managed by a small group of writers, artists, and caretakers, the house became both a physical and spiritual refuge for those seeking to confront their past, find inspiration, or share their narratives with the world. Visitors often came to the House of Rain during storms, drawn by word of mouth or sheer curiosity. The house's reputation as a place where stories could heal had spread far and wide, and it wasn't uncommon for people to arrive from different corners of the globe. Upon arrival, guests were greeted by the house's current caretaker, a warm, welcoming figure who understood the delicate nature of storytelling. No questions were asked, and no judgments were made. The only expectation was that visitors would eventually share their story, either through writing, art, or spoken word. The house itself seemed to respond to the needs of its inhabitants. Each visitor was given a room tailored to their emotional state. These rooms, known as the rooms of reflection, were quiet, comfortable spaces designed to inspire introspection and creativity. One room might be filled with soft, ambient light and shelves of books for someone seeking knowledge and guidance. Another might feature a large window overlooking the rain, perfect for those who found solace in nature. Some rooms had old typewriters, while others had canvases and paints. Visitors often remarked that the house seemed to know them better than they knew themselves, offering precisely what they needed to unlock their creative potential. At the heart of the House of Rain was the Library of Lives, the mysterious room Arthur had discovered in his final years. The library had grown exponentially, its shelves now filled with thousands of books. Each book bore the name of a visitor who had shared their story within the house's walls. Visitors were encouraged to add their stories to the library, whether they chose to write them down, dictate them to a caretaker, or create something visual. Once a story was complete, it became part of the library, where future guests could read and draw inspiration from it. The library was open to all, and many found solace in reading the struggles and triumphs of those who had come before them. The room was a testament to the universality of human experience, showing that no one was truly alone in their fears, hopes, or dreams. Beyond individual reflection, the House of Rain hosted regular workshops and storytelling gatherings. These events were open to both residents and the local community. Workshops covered everything from the basics of narrative structure to advanced techniques in horror, fantasy, and memoir writing. Experienced writers led sessions on overcoming writer's block, finding one's voice, and using storytelling as a tool for personal growth. The gatherings were more informal, often held in the house's grand parlor by a roaring fire. Visitors and locals alike shared their tales aloud, weaving a tapestry of experiences that spanned cultures, generations, and genres. These evenings were filled with laughter, tears, and the occasional shiver as ghost stories made their rounds. One of the house's most cherished artifacts was Arthur's original pen, displayed in a glass case in the study where he had written his final story. It was said that those who held the pen felt a surge of creativity, as if Arthur's spirit still guided the hand of the storyteller. Once a year, on the anniversary of Arthur's passing, the pen was taken from its case for a special ritual. Visitors and caretakers would gather to write a collective story, each person contributing a paragraph. The story would then be added to the Library of Lives, symbolizing the unity of the house's purpose. The caretakers of the House of Rain were individuals deeply moved by Arthur's work. Some were former visitors who had found healing within the house and chosen to stay, while others were writers and artists who believed in the power of storytelling to transform lives. Their role was multifaceted. They maintained the house, guided new visitors, organized events, and preserved the ever-growing Library of Lives. They also served as mentors, helping guests navigate the often difficult process of confronting and articulating their innermost thoughts and emotions. Each caretaker had their own story, and together they formed a community bound by a shared belief in the redemptive power of narrative. The House of Rain continued to thrive, its influence extending far beyond its walls. Visitors often left with renewed purpose, carrying their stories into the world and inspiring others to do the same. Many credited the house with saving their lives, providing them with the tools to face their fears and embrace their truths. Arthur Maynard's legacy lived on, not just in his own stories, but in the countless lives he had touched through his work and the sanctuary he had created. And on rainy November nights, when the storms rolled in and the wind howled, the House of Rain stood as a beacon for those who sought solace in the timeless power of storytelling. Stories from the House of Rain. The House of Rain was more than just a place. It was a vessel for the stories of those who found their way to its doors. Each visitor arrived carrying the weight of their personal struggles, and through the act of storytelling, they left lighter, more whole. Here are 3 such stories, tales of transformation, courage, and the human spirit. 1. The Man with the Empty Frame. Elliot Brax arrived at the House of Rain late one stormy night, clutching a large, empty picture frame. His face was drawn and pale, his eyes hollow with grief. When the caretaker welcomed him, Elliot offered only a brief explanation. "I've lost her." The room assigned to Elliot was filled with canvases and paints, yet he avoided them for days. Instead, he spent his time in the Library of Lives, pacing between the shelves as though searching for something he couldn't name. Finally, during a workshop on visual storytelling, Elliot confessed his story. He had been a painter, and the frame he carried once held his masterpiece, a portrait of his late wife, Lily. She had been his muse, his anchor, but after her sudden passing, he had destroyed the painting in a fit of despair. The empty frame now served as a haunting reminder of what he had lost. With gentle encouragement, Elliot began painting again. At first, his strokes were hesitant, filled with doubt. But as the days passed, his confidence grew. One night, inspired by a thunderstorm, he painted a new portrait, not of Lily, but of the two of them together, surrounded by rain. The painting captured the love they had shared and the resilience he had found in her memory. When he added the final brushstroke, Elliot felt a profound sense of release. He placed the painting in the empty frame, which now seemed full of life and color once more. Elliot left the House of Rain with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to share his art with the world again. His story was added to the Library of Lives, a testament to the healing power of creation. Two, the girl who feared the dark. Clara was only 16 when she arrived at the House of Rain, her parents reluctantly dropping her off after years of sleepless nights and unexplained terror. For as long as she could remember, Clara had been afraid of the dark. But this wasn't an ordinary childhood fear. It was a paralyzing dread that kept her from living a normal life. The caretakers assigned her a room with a single, small lamp and soft shadows that danced along the walls. Clara spent her first nights huddled beneath the blankets, too afraid to sleep. During a gathering in the grand parlor, Clara shared her story. She spoke of the dark ones she had seen as a child, shadowy figures that appeared in the corners of her room, watching her with glowing eyes. No one had believed her, dismissing her experiences as nightmares or overactive imagination. The caretakers encouraged Clara to confront her fears through storytelling. She began writing a fictionalized account of her encounters, giving the dark ones names and motives. As the story unfolded, Clara discovered a surprising truth. Her fear had given these creatures power, but by understanding them, she could reclaim that power. One night, Clara turned off the lamp in her room. For the first time, she faced the darkness head-on, her fear replaced by a quiet resolve. When morning came, she emerged stronger, her story complete. Clara's tale, The Shadows That Listen, became a favorite among visitors, a reminder that even our deepest fears can be transformed through understanding and courage. Three, the Wanderer's Compass. Javier Ortega was a man with no direction. He had spent years drifting from place to place, chasing fleeting opportunities and running from his past. When he stumbled upon the House of Rain during a November storm, he carried nothing but a battered backpack and a rusted compass. Javier's room was simple, with a writing desk and a map of the world pinned to the wall. For days, he stared at the map, tracing the places he had been and the roads he had taken. But no matter how far he traveled, he felt as though he had never truly moved forward. One evening, a caretaker found him sitting by the fire, the compass in his hand. Javier confessed that it had belonged to his father, a man he had left behind years ago after a bitter argument. The compass, once a symbol of their shared adventures, now served as a reminder of the relationship he had lost. With the caretaker's guidance, Javier began writing letters to his father. At first, they were filled with anger and regret, but over time, they shifted into something more profound, an acknowledgement of their shared pain and a desire for reconciliation. As Javier wrote, he felt a weight lifting. He finally understood that his journey had never been about the places he visited, but about finding his way back to himself and those he loved. Before leaving the House of Rain, Javier mailed one of his letters to his father. Weeks later, he received a reply, a simple note asking him to come home. Javier's story, The Wanderer's Compass, became a symbol of forgiveness and the importance of finding one's true path. The ripple effect. Each visitor's story added a new layer to the House of Rain, their experiences woven into its fabric. The house itself seemed to grow and change with every tale, its walls resonating with the collective strength and resilience of those who passed through its doors. The Library of Lives stood as a testament to the power of storytelling, a beacon for future visitors seeking solace and inspiration. And on rainy November nights, the house continued to welcome those in need, offering them a chance to confront their fears, heal their wounds, and find their voice.